So Simon will probably tell you that he took the plunge from being a scientist to being a science journalist. While he was doing that, he was my flatmate, so I saw a lot of this process firsthand, and it really sort of saw quite how brave a thing that is to do, to go from the security of doing something that you've been trained to do into a freelance world where you're completely working on your own, and there's no institution really behind you to get that started. And then to go from talking about your own research that you've been doing for 5 years to every week having to talk accurately to the whole world about somebody else's research. And I guess part of the clearest, most important part of that is not being misunderstood. So over to Simon.
Okay, so I'm here to talk about how to write good, basically. So why is that important? Well, I shouldn't have to say that science and research isn't just about running experiments, collecting and analysing data. It's fundamentally about communication. If you fail to communicate, you've failed full stop. That's always been the case, but we're here in the context of open research, and in that context, it becomes even more important. The whole idea of open research is to make your work as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And as open research really takes off, more and more people will be engaging with your work, and as that circle of people grows, the amount of relevant background knowledge they've got will get less and less, so it becomes more and more important to write as clearly as you can. Journalists in particular get frequently accused of getting science wrong, but spare a thought for the poor hack working on a daily paper, tasked with churning out 3 or 4 stories a day. They've frequently got a couple of hours to compound a really complex topic, make their lives as easy as possible, and those kinds of misrepresentations hopefully will happen less. Okay, so as Casper said, I wasn't always a journalist. I used to be a researcher. I did my PhD in computational auditory scene analysis, which basically means using computer models to try to understand how the auditory system pulls out a sound source it's interested in from a mixture of sound sources. And these were the kind of titles of papers I had to deal with on a regular basis. I quickly came across my favourite writer in the field, a guy called Chris Darwin, who was basically Mr. Speech Perception in the UK at Sussex University. And it should be clear from this why I liked him. Now, there's actually very little difference in meaning between those two statements, but one is obviously a lot easier to read than the other. Now, obviously, you're not always going to be able to do that. That's a review paper, so it's quite broad what it's writing about. I think it's actually a book chapter. But it wasn't just titles that he was good at. I quickly found that his papers were a lot easier to read than other researchers. He was probably doing that intuitively. What I hope to do in the next hour I've got is give you some tips on how he was probably achieving that. Very basic rule, keep related words together. What do I mean by that? Take that sentence. What cost £1 there? The dinner or the call? There's ambiguity. Now there isn't. Similarly, there you're interrupting the object and the verb in the sentence with a clause that could just as easily go at the beginning. And what you've done there is reduce the distance between 2 related words, the object and the verb, reduced it to nothing. That makes easier reading. There's one exception to this kind of rule. For instance, another example might be Donald Trump, US presidential candidate, is probably not a writer. The technical term is a noun in apposition. Basically, it's referring to the same thing so it doesn't interrupt the flow. The rule spelled out is grammatical subjects should be followed as soon as possible by their verbs. That means that element, that piece of the architecture of the sentence reaches some closure, so you minimise the amount of information that's got to be carried until the reader gets that sense of fulfilment. This will often involve a change from passive to active voice. If you ever go into a career as a writer, you'll find that editors are obsessed with active voice. Not so much in science writing, you can get away with passive voice, but an editor will strip out any passive voice you use and change it to active voice. And there's a good reason for that. It's stronger, and it also tends to be shorter. And the golden rule of writing is brevity. There's an example. The levels of gene expression measured by the researchers. The researchers measured gene expression levels. The second sentence is stronger, more vigorous, and also shorter, giving readers less work to do. It's not always appropriate to use passive voice. Sometimes it will depend on the story you're trying to tell. The first one is active voice, genes encode proteins. The second is passive voice. If the story you're telling is about genes, number one's appropriate. If you're telling a story about proteins, it's probably better to use the second one. It's just that proteins story in this case is a passive one. So that brings us to rule number 2. Put the thing, person, whose story the sentence is telling at the beginning in what we call, in the jargon, the topic position. That's because readers have expectations, unconscious expectations about the structure of discourse writing. One of the most fundamental of which is they expect to be told what the sentence is fundamentally about right at the start. And as well as providing linkage, context looking forward into the sentence, it also serves to provide linkage looking back. So it should generally be old information that the reader's encountered already. Another expectation readers have is they tend to put emphasis on information that appears at points of syntactic closure. That's basically, fundamentally, the end of the sentence. So put the information, rule number 3, put the information you want the reader to emphasise at the end. What we call the stress position. Save the best for last, in other words. You can also use, if there's more information you want stressed than one, you can sometimes use a semicolon to break a sentence into that and gives you 2 stress positions. And what you're doing here is readers want, at the beginning of the sentence, they want familiarity and orientation. At the end of the sentence, they want a sense of arrival and closure. So all the information that you're about to tell the story of goes at the start. New and interesting information you want to emphasise goes at the end. Okay, some basic style rules. This can apply to any kind of writing. Readers prefer to be told what is and what isn't. So try to put statements in positive form. This also frequently gets rid of lots of needless words. And where you can, use definite, specific, concrete language rather than vague, general and abstract language. For instance, what would you rather read? A spell of unfavourable weather set in, or it rained every day for a week. I know what I find important to read. Avoid passives. It is thought that what's wrong with researchers think, or most researchers think, some researchers think, be as specific as you can. Avoid tautologies. Ever since is another example. There are lots of others. Avoid cliches, and although in science there's lots of uncertainty, if you can, save conditionals like may, might, would, can, could, for situations of genuine real uncertainty. If you hedge everything, it just makes your writing flat. And another golden rule, again, brevity, omit unnecessary words. And this scientific writing is rife with this. And it's just unnecessary work for the reader, especially the phrase, the fact that, owing to the fact that. You can almost always strip that phrase out of any piece of writing. What's wrong with because? This should actually be probably rule number one. You have a design, you have a structure, and the basic building block of a piece of writing of any length is the paragraph. The beginning of each paragraph is a signal that you're starting a new step in the development of the subject or the argument. Make 1 point per paragraph. It can be broken, but it's a good rule of thumb. Some writing guides you read will give you kind of rule of thumb about lengths of sentences and paragraphs. There isn't any set formula. They can be as long as you want, they just have to work, both sentences and paragraphs. But a paragraph has to hold together as a logical unit. And a good rule of thumb for a sentence is if there are too many strong candidates for information you want to stress, then you've got stress positions in the sentence. It's probably too long. It's a good idea to vary the length of your sentences, just because it makes more enjoyable reading. Basically, you can create variety in rhythm by varying the sentence lengths. But while you're doing that, try to use that also to represent the actual relations between the ideas and the facts that you're discussing. Try to use the variation to best represent that. Transitions. Again, editors love transitions. I call them signposts because they're there to make sure that the reader knows where they are, where they've been, where they're going, to make sure the reader doesn't get lost. You basically give a concise summary of what's gone before. This can be a sentence at the beginning of a paragraph, or it can be a paragraph on its own. Here's something I just had published recently, and there's an example of both. Here, there's a paragraph on its own. Armed with a suspect for Parkinson's and a theory to test regarding Alzheimer's role in disease progression, researchers could, blah, blah, you're summing up what's gone before and also giving an indication as to what's about to follow. And there's a similar thing, summing up the 2 paragraphs above in just a single sentence at the start of a paragraph. Not all of that was there in my draft. Some of this was asked for by editors. Okay, some journalistic jargon for you. A lead is and leads and intros are often, those words are often used interchangeably, but strictly a lead is a news journalism phrase. In news, you'll see all the information in the very first paragraph. What, why, where, when, who. And there's good reason for that. People reading news are frequently in a hurry, and they frequently only read the first few paragraphs. An intro is another word for lead, but it's also more appropriate when you're talking about writing a feature. And features are fundamentally different. a reader reading the first few paragraphs of a feature is no good. You want to pull them in to read 3,000, 4,000 words. And features have a typical structure. The most important part of that structure is your intro, sometimes called a grab, and it has to be grab because you're trying to convince them to read the whole thing. The next most important thing is the nut graph, short for nutshell paragraph, where the Americans sometimes call this a billboard. And you basically give them a signpost of the entire feature. You tell them what it's about, what they're going to learn if they read to the end. And you can see the basic outline there isn't that dissimilar to standard scientific writing with your abstract, your intro, your methods, your results, and your discussion. But you can't explicitly flag that in writing for the public, but the structure has to be there to make the writing compelling to pull the reader through. There are numerous types of grabs. These are probably the three most common, the anecdote, the question, and the quote. And there's an example of an anecdote. I won't read it out in a short time. And there's the nut graph there. Here's another kind of graph. This is actually from a news story that hasn't been published yet about research showing that the levels of corruption in a society influence the intrinsic honesty of the citizens of that society. And there I've used a question. And so I've broken a rule here. The lead has gone down into the third paragraph. That's because rules are for breaking. But you have to know the rules before you break them. And do it knowingly and do it for a reason. And I've heard two golden rules of science writing. One is assume the reader is exactly as intelligent as you, don't condescend. Assume your audience is intelligent, but assume none of your knowledge. Explain everything. The other golden rule I've heard is always remember nobody has to read this shit. That refers to the grab. And probably the most frequently quoted saying about writing, I think it's often attributed to Hemingway, but it's probably been said since people have been writing is rewriting. Nobody gets it right first time. 95% of the work is redrafting. And that's it.
Brilliant. Questions? Oh, it's so clear. Where was that?
Hi, that was brilliant, thank you. I'm just curious what you think the roots of this bad writing are. There's a lovely... The roots of this bad writing, what is it about graduate education? Are the practices about graduate education that lead people to write in these obfuscatory ways? I guess the word obfuscatory is kind of an example of the problem.
I think probably the most fundamental thing is that researchers aren't trained in this. It's not rocket science. You can pick it up very quickly, but it's not part of the training. Possibly with some people, it's a tendency to be wordy because they think that adds weight to their prose, when in fact, it's adding weight, but that's exactly what you don't want to do. You want to streamline, give vigor and speed and clarity.
So I was going to say, I think also a lot of scientists, as long as they're not receiving training in how to write, which is quite essential if you want to write, they're also writing in a second language, which makes it more difficult.
Yeah, and I wasn't going to mention that because that's
Whole new bit area.
that comes with science, and that's a difficult problem to address.
But I wonder as well if some of the sort of unwieldiness of a lot of science writing is to do with people wanting to try and be as accurate and precise in what they're explaining. Like, it's almost like sort of trying to be a lawyer rather than simply communicating.
Absolutely. And my first draft of this talk, I had a worked example, but when I first rehearsed it, it was half an hour, so I had to strip all that out. If we went to a workshop, we could maybe work through that, where I show that, yeah, part of the difficulty in comprehending scientific writing is the complexity, the jargon, and you need jargon sometimes for precision. But you'd be amazed how much extra clarity you can get without changing a single term, without losing any of the jargon or the complexity of the argument, just by restructuring sentences according to the rules. And while I'm on the subject, if you take nothing else away from this, remember this: Strunk and White, The Elements of Style, written almost 60 years ago, still the Bible. Most of what I said is in here, small enough to carry around in your coat pocket.
Just to add to that point, I also think my sense is that I think researchers in general, like any discipline, but especially science, I think scientists broadly speaking, are very so immersed in their own thinking that they don't realize how that is coming across to someone who's not an expert or who's, you know, on the outside. And I speak French, German, and Dutch, so like I did a teacher training for English, you know, just to one of those, you know, EFL type things. And you know, it's interesting. Like people were always the people who had actually spent. Well, we spent like an hour or two just literally learning like a completely new language that none of us knew. It was for me. I knew what they were trying to do. They were trying to put you through the discomfort of learning something from scratch, you know, and just try and empathize with like actually how hard it is to learn a language. And teachers, often the best English teachers are, you know, teachers actually do speak another language because they know how it works and they know that it's hard, and they try to simplify things and make it more accessible when they're teaching. Whereas we had like fellow students who would say, well, that's just the way it is, you know, it's just the rule, like that's just how it is in English. It's like, that's not a good way to teach. So I think it's that immersion, and I think a bit of like dipping toes in other disciplines might help people empathize a bit more. But I think most any academic discipline nowadays is so drilled down and so deep, but the cross interdisciplinarity is kind of lost. So I think that empathy thing is maybe part of it. But you know, you're so immersed in your own research and thinking, and you're not able to.
Sure. And there's probably a kind of propagation. You get immersed in a very small field. A lot of people writing in that field are very comfortable with terminology and the language, and they lose awareness that it's even difficult. I was never one of those researchers. I've always found research difficult to read and comprehend, which I think is possibly one reason I seem to be really good at explaining it to the people I know what's in.
Thanks for that. It's really, really helpful. Do me a favour, don't ever read anything I've written. I'm actually from the home counties, and I went to Eton. I sound like this because I want to talk to people on the street. So I know what the rules are, and I know why I'm breaking them. I'm wondering whether you think we should all speak RP. No. And why is that? If we want to be as accessible as possible and we want to communicate to as many people as possible, why do we have to have all these rules for the way that we're writing that kind of gets rid of the friction and the difference, but then the way that we speak, that's all fine. Why the difference?
Conversing and writing are very, very different when you're conversing with somebody, there's an enormous amount of other channels of communication going on. And you can feel your way around what the rules of that engagement are as you go. You can't do that when you're writing. So you have to use these concepts that have been uncovered over the years that have been found to deliver on clarity. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I don't agree, but yeah.
I mean, there's lots of different kinds of writing. You know, there's scientific writing, there's writing a feature for a magazine, there's blogging, and all of those are very different and require different degrees of sticking to the rules. But as I said at the end, none of these are unbreakable rules. It's just guidelines. If you see a problem, or frequently if somebody else sees a problem in a piece of prose you've written, look to these rules, see if any of them can help you make it clearer.
We're going to break our rules and keep going with a few more questions because clearly there are a lot of questions. So yeah, over there.
So I have to go through the reverse process of this. I come from a journalistic background and then I had to learn academic writing, and it was very frustrating. But my question is, do you think, like, one of the things we do with kind of writing in journalism or for the web is we have a very clear audience in mind, we know who we are speaking to, and that's like one of the rules, that you always write for someone. Do you think the lack, kind of ambiguity of that in academic writing tends to be a reason why sentences stretch and run around in circles? Like, if there was a clearer idea exactly who you're writing for. It's just, I've been curious about this, I might be wrong, but...
Well, I'm not sure I detected a question there. What's it?
Like, so when I'm writing online for whatever website, I know exactly who I'm writing for. Like, I know, say if it's BuzzFeed, for instance, there's a very defined audience and there's a very defined language for that, which makes it easier to like be specific, go to the point. So the style it's reader-centric, whereas it almost like, well, at least when I was writing, I felt like I didn't know who my reader was for academic writing mostly, and that almost meant like I'm just writing whatever I have to write. So do you think that, I mean, I'm wondering if that is what makes the difference?
You've touched on one of the golden rules that I didn't mention, which is always know your audience. But surely when you're writing a journal paper, your audience is more pre-specified than any other writing. And because of that audience, you can get away with a lot more. But I would say that in the context of open research, you should be thinking about broadening that audience. So the members of the public are becoming more motivated and far more able to directly engage with research output. Yeah, scientific writing ideally should become less influential.
One last question.
Rather than a question, actually, I want to add an answer to the question of why scientific writing is so much more wordy. One of the things I've been taught is that, you know, when you use the passive voice, which is what happens in scientific paper, you're removing the active person, sort of saying the protein was synthesized. It appears that it just happens by nature. We're saying he synthesized the protein, you're taking the scientist into it, and you always want to appear objective in a scientific paper, so that's why you would write in passive voice.
Okay, let's thank Simon once more.